Let's talk about recruitment funnels, how to optimize recruitment funnels, and how to track recruitment funnels on a day-to-day basis to ensure that moments for potential optimization are uncovered as quickly as possible and that they are implemented, that the optimizations are implemented as quickly as possible. At Clara, we use something that we very simply call a Clara recruitment funnel framework. And it's actually 25 measures that we look at on a day-to-day basis for every clinical trial that we work with. And I know 25 kind of sounds like a lot of numbers. It's actually not. And here's why. It's super intuitive. At the heart of our day-to-day analysis, that anchor is your recruitment funnel. So this is something you've designed yourself, and this is something you ought to know very, very intimately. And by setting this as the center of that universe, we're able to run very quick, very relevant, and very intuitive analysis on a day-to-day basis. Now, with that as the center, with the recruitment funnel as the center, we set up two companion measure sets. So one of these companion measures are called conversion rates, and the other is simply cost at each step, so conversion rates and cost. And we also have two diagnostic measures that help us understand very quickly what's happening in the funnel and where potential problems might be. Those diagnostic measures are heat maps and response times. So with the funnel as the center, with two companion measures on the side, and with diagnostic measurements such as heat maps and response times, we're able to tell on a day-to-day basis exactly what is working well in a funnel, what requires improvement, and how to track the improvement that will be happening, the optimizations that are taking hold over time. So that's the framework, the Clara funnel framework. Those are the 25 metrics that we're going to look at today. And we should get started with the center of this thing, which is your recruitment funnel. So let's get started. So let's talk about the heart of our daily analysis, the center of our data universe. It's just your clinical trial recruitment funnel. Once again, this is something you've spent time designing. It's something that you know like the back of your hand, how someone becomes aware of your clinical trials and every step that they would potentially need to take to get enrolled in your clinical trial. Here's how we divide it up though in our analysis under our Clara framework. And I'll say this with a caveat that every clinical trial, of course, is quite different in design. Maybe you have 3 screening appointments. Maybe you have none. Maybe you have 1 consent appointment, or maybe it requires 3. Whatever the case might be, ensure that you're capturing each step and accounting for every single moment that a patient needs to graduate from one step to the next and get that down on paper and analyze it on a day-to-day basis. It will yield so many opportunities for optimizations down the road. But let's talk about the way we think about clinical trial recruitment funnels, starting at the top, which is impression. Impression is just an old advertising term. It's the awareness that you build. It's the number of people that you spread your message to, who hear your message or see your message. In our case, we run a lot of pretty sophisticated digital ads. And the big benefit of digital is precision, not just in targeting, but in reporting. So I know on a day-to-day basis for any clinical trial that I work with, what's happening in terms of impressions. I know down to the single digit how many impressions I want, not just on a day-to-day basis, but on an hour-to-hour basis. So make sure you're counting impressions accurately as possible. You might not be buying just digital ads. Many clinical trials choose to buy traditional ads as well. So everything from newspaper ads all the way up to billboards, that is traditional media. And those vendors in this day and age are fortunately able to turn around pretty good estimates of the daily reach that you ought to have with your media buy. So if you're buying a billboard or a park bench ad or a subway ad, work with your vendor to get that impression estimate and divide it up across the days that you're buying the ad for and make sure that you're accounting for it day to day. It will make the rest of your calculations and the companion measures flow so much easier if you have an accurate top of funnel count. Now, visit isn't necessarily a visit to your clinical trial site just yet. It's a visit to some online portal that you've set up. 21st century patients demand 21st century service, and they prefer to do things online. So make sure that your landing page is able to turn around visit counts for you so that you have an accurate understanding, an accurate barometer as to what traffic is coming in. At Clara, we spin up our own landing pages. And again, that gives us the precision of knowing almost on an hour-to-hour basis what's going on in terms of visits. But any IT company will at least be able to get you a day-to-day measure. So ask for that and ask for that reporting regularly and make sure that you're accounting for it. Again, it's only by setting up the top of your funnel that you can calculate all the other stuff that you need to optimize your recruitment effort. Lead. If impression is an old advertising term, lead is an old sales term. Lead just simply refers to anyone who says, hey, I'm interested. Here's my contact information. Get back to me. So that's a lead. Make sure that you're counting leads as well as you possibly can. It might be 90% of people coming in through your landing page and saying, hey, I'm interested and I found the contact module at the bottom of this page and here I am filling it out. And it might be 10% people who are coming in via email or phone call because they saw you on a billboard somewhere. In either case, capture that lead information holistically, get every channel from email, phone call, text message, fax to digital, consolidate all of them so that you have an accurate measure. Same thing holds true for pre-screen. So a pre-screen completion is anyone who's obviously completed a pre-screener, and that can also come through a lot of different channels. It might not be that a majority of your pre-screeners are administered online, but that a majority are administered with someone on your team walking the patient through a survey over the phone. Whatever the case might be, make sure that you're capturing all those channels in your analysis. And from there, it cascades down to passing your pre-screener to consenting, screening, and enrolling. Again, this is about where the waters start to get murky across the industry. It's because every clinical trial is so different. Make sure that you're accounting for every step. If there are 3 screening appointments that a patient needs to go to, write out screener 1, screener 2, screener 3, and track those on a day-to-day basis. Because when you start looking at the secondary companion measure of conversion rates, and when you start looking at heat maps and response times to diagnose what might be happening in your funnel, all that separation of data, all that granularity is only going to yield good things for you down the road. It's going to empower you and your team to make the quick adjustments that you need to make sure that your funnel is optimized. So that's the heart of it. It's just a recruitment funnel all the way from awareness down to enrollment. So let's talk then about one of the companion measure sets, which are conversion rate. So let's talk about the first companion set of metrics that we use to supplement our daily understanding of what is happening in our recruitment funnel. That very first set of companion metrics are called conversion rates. Conversion rates are just quite simply the number of people who are graduating from one step to the next. So the percentage of people who are going, let's say, from impression to visit or visit to lead or what have you, all the way down to the percentage of people who go into enrollment. So that's what we call conversion rates. And that's the first set of companion measures that we look at on a day-to-day basis, the conversion rate between each step. And while every clinical trial can be quite different, there are still some industry averages that we could look to benchmark ourselves and our funnel performance. And they all happen at the top of the funnel, as it so happens. So let's talk about the very first conversion rate, the conversion rate from impression to visit. The industry average for the conversion rate from impression to visit is about 1%. At Clara, we actually shoot for 2 to 3%, which is obviously double or triple the industry average. The way we're able to do this is we actually do a lot of work to make sure that the way we buy impressions, the people we speak to and seek out through digital advertising, we make sure that that's all really well targeted. So by doing some back-end work, we're filling the funnel at the very top with traffic that is pretty well qualified already, full of motivated patients who are looking for a clinical trial like the ones we're helping out. But again, when you're buying across traditional media, digital media, and flyers even, your impression to visit rate will get diluted. That's just a matter of math. So if you're in that 1% ballpark, that's pretty good. 2 to 3%, that's what we shoot for here at Clara. The visit to lead rate. So the number of people or the percentage of people leaving their contact information and saying, I'm interested from visiting your landing page, the industry average is about 2%. What we look for here is about 3 to 4%. Now, a lot of that is due to the fact that we have this luxury of being able to own and create our own landing pages, full of the best practices that we learned over working with many trials and thousands of patients. However, you don't need to have that much technical know-how, that much coding know-how to be able to get to this more aggressive 3 to 4% rate from the 2% industry average. If you think about your landing page, it's basically your welcome mat. It's your handshake. It's a big hug that you give to the person coming in who wants to find out more. So when you understand it that way, it's actually quite intuitive that the more engaging your landing page is, the more chances that you're going to give yourself to converting a visitor into someone who is now interested. So make sure that content is really high quality. Make sure that the photography is really high quality. Make sure that the language you use is super clear, easy to understand, and speak in the language of the patient so that they don't feel intimidated or scared or put off by the way you're speaking to them as they come in for their big welcome. So 3 to 4%, that's what we shoot for. 2% about industry average. If you could get even a little bit north of 2%, I would say you're doing a pretty good job. Now, if we go from lead to pre-screen, this number actually gets a little more aggressive on our end. We shoot for 10%. So 10% of people leaving their contact information will complete the pre-screener survey. Of course, the industry average is about 5. The reason we're able to do this is we fixate on a couple of different measures. One we'll talk about, which is response times in a little bit. But by making sure that our outreach to the patient, our hospitality to the patient, the way we engage them and how quickly we engage them once they indicate interest, that actually gives us a great ability to convert a lead who is now excited about the trial into someone who is excited enough to take a pre-screener. So if you're quick to get back to a patient, if you're super responsive, if the tone of voice and the hospitality that you show this lead who is now interested is really, really high quality, you're going to set yourself up for, I bet, something north of 5%. But again, 5% is industry average. 10% is what we shoot for here at Clara. Anything in between, again, pretty good job. Now, from pre-screen to passing, passing to consenting, and so on, down to enrollment, that can obviously differ quite wildly. If my pre-screener only has one condition, one question that needs to get answered, and the question just needs to be answered yes versus no, that's going to give me a much better chance at getting, let's say, a 50% pass rate versus a trial with really stringent exclusion and inclusion criteria. So from here on down, it can vary quite wildly, and there is unfortunately no real industry measure, no industry average. However, by getting in the practice of measuring these conversion rates step to step to step on a daily basis, you're going to set yourself up for success all the way through your recruitment effort. It's going to reveal so much about where the hurdles might be, where the hangups might be, if you're buying too many unfocused, untargeted impressions, or if there's a problem with the nature of the way you're administering the pre-screener. All those problems, all those potential hurdles, all those potential solutions will reveal themselves once you start looking at your conversion rate. So we think this is a pretty important companion measure, the conversion rate. Now we'll talk a little bit about the way we think about cost under the Clara framework. Let's talk about the second companion measure, which is quite simply just cost. Of course, everything in this world costs time, money, and effort to run. And as it turns out, holds true for clinical trials as well. Now, one big pitfall that we've noticed in the industry is a tendency sometimes to analyze cost as big buckets. So instead of looking at cost per visit, let's say, people just tend to look at total spend and assume that that has facilitated each step efficiently of our recruitment funnel. And I think that's a pretty big mistake. Here's why. When you look at cost at each step, and when you really interrogate the cost of every unit of each step, so the cost that we spent to get a lead, the cost that we spent to complete a pre-screener, looking at costs at that micro level on a day-to-day basis allows us real good transparency into just where some potential inefficiency might lie and how we could free up our own resources to reallocate into the important work of the research and less so into this work of recruiting. So let's talk about how we think about costs at each step and some nuances that we've discovered along the way. Now, at the very top is quite simple. It's just the total spend that you've used to spread your message over the number of impressions that you've won, the number of eyeballs and ears that you've won by spreading your message. You're going to want to, of course, include in impressions all the digital advertising that you've done and all the vendor estimations of impressions that were provided to you before you bought your more traditional media like newspapers and billboards. Make sure that's holistic. One common mistake that I see in the industry and across any advertising really is a tendency to overemphasize and over-index on cost per impression. And by diving to the bottom, by going as low as you possibly can on that cost per impression, what you're actually doing is setting yourself up for costlier mistakes down the line. And intuitively, this makes pretty easy sense. If I'm spending $1 million to buy a Super Bowl ad and I get 30 million impressions, I might consider that a pretty good win in relation to the cost that I might have spent on a more targeted digital advertising campaign. But of those 30 million, if only 1,000 turn into visits and only 10 become leads, and that trickles all the way down to 0 enrollments, I've effectively wasted $1 million or $10 million or whatever that cost was because I thought that cost per impression was so attractive. So make sure you're balancing your analysis between cost per impression, which is important to optimize towards, and the amount of targeting that you're doing as a result of your buy. So one common mistake that we see at the top of the funnel that sets up compounding failures down the funnel. Now, cost per visit, cost per lead, all that's pretty self-explanatory. It's just the total spend over the number of visits, total spend over the number of leads generated. But once you start getting into pre-screener and consented and screened, there are some nuances to consider. Let's talk about the cost per completed pre-screener. Maybe you're using a beautiful HIPAA-compliant survey that's embedded right on your landing page, and that's how you're drawing 90% of your clinical trial leads. Congratulations, that's quite good. However, if the remaining 10% require a lot of your coordinator's efforts to call, set up calls with emails and text messages, and then a 15-minute call to begin the pre-screener and another 15-minute call to ensure that the pre-screener has been all the way completed, that is human cost that you're incurring. So you're going to want to measure that as closely as you possibly can to ensure that you're getting a holistic view of what it's actually costing you to run that pre-screener. You might find that your coordinator's time is better spent doing actual research versus facilitating, setting up, and running phone calls to complete a pre-screener. Now, same thing holds for consent and screened as well. Some consent steps are quite simple. All a patient has to do is mark on an electronic form, yes, I consent. Others can be a lot more involved. Some even require in-person visits. And of course, we know that screening isn't necessarily as simple as just one step of screening. Screening could be 3 separate events with 2 in-person visits and 1 phone call and an MRI machine or a CAT scan or what have you. So make sure that you're trying to capture as much of that cost as possible as you run your analysis. It's going to help uncover any potential inefficiencies that you have, any potential allocations of your human talent that you could be better allocating to the important work of research. So the big takeaway here when we look at the companion cost measure is make sure that this is being holistically analyzed and make sure that you're looking at it on a day-to-day basis and make sure that you're getting as granular as you can. Get down to the unit at each step so that you understand where your time is being spent, where your money is being spent, and most importantly, where your human capital is being spent. And I think that's going to uncover a lot of potential optimizations for your funnel. So we talked now about the 2 measures, the 2 companion measures. Now we're going to talk about 2 diagnostic measures, 2 ways of quickly understanding what's going on in your funnel and where potential problems might be and where pre-existing problems already are. So let's talk about heat maps and response times next. What the Clara framework allows, what the 25 metrics that we look at on a day-to-day basis allow, is a quick and easy understanding of exactly what is happening in our funnel from each step, how much it's costing us, and where potential problems might lie. Now, to help uncover some quick truths about our funnel, we use 2 diagnostic measures, 2 companion measures for diagnosis called heat maps and response times. Heat maps, response times. So let's talk about each one in sequence and how we think of the way we run diagnostics when it comes to funnel analysis here at Clara. Heat map is what it sounds like. It's a map of where users are spending the most amount of time on your landing pages. So at Clara, we're able to generate aggregate views of where people are spending the most time, where people are spending no time, and we can create visualizations of that data so that we could quickly understand at the snap of a finger what is going on. So if I see that a button is highlighted in red, I know that almost everyone is clicking on that button. If I see that, the bottom 30% of my page is just completely blue, I know that no one has visited that last 30% of my page. And I can use that to understand how I'm reaching and engaging patients as they come in that front door and how I'm presenting my information, my education, my opportunity, and how they are responding in kind. So it's a really cool visual way of diagnosing what is happening at the top of the funnel. Now, heat maps aren't available to everybody, and not every IT vendor is going to have access to the technology. But the good news is that in the 21st century, there are no shortage of resources that you can use for tracking purposes. So the one that I would recommend, if you do not have access, or if your vendors or teams do not have access or ability to generate a heat map for you, what I recommend is using Google Analytics. Google Analytics is a free tool from Google that allows any web domain to understand what's happening on their pages. So you can use a couple of measures that they provide to quickly replicate what you would do with a visual heat map. Measures such as average time on page, measures such as average number of pages visited, which exit pages are the most popular. All this information is going to allow you to understand what's going on in your funnel. So if you don't have a heat map, try to get Google Analytics embedded. It's very quick to implement, very easy to learn how to operate their dashboard. And again, measures such as average time on page, average number of pages visited, all that stuff is going to give you a great sense of what's going on. For example, if you're noticing that your visit to lead rate is an anemic 1% and you're really hoping for that 2.5% that you set yourself up as an internal guideline, if you're wondering what's going on, you can look to a heat map, or you could look to Google Analytics, and you might discover that an average patient who comes in to your landing page is only spending 5 seconds there, which is probably not long enough to read any of the material that you've provided, and certainly not long enough to drop their contact information. So look at heat maps, look at Google Analytics, average pages, average length of stay, all those metrics to get a sense of how you're greeting people as they come in the door. So this first measure, the heat map, encompasses what I like to call the welcome phase of our clinical trial funnel. So this is what I like to call welcome. And the reason is something I've repeated a couple of times now. The way you message your clinical trial, the way you greet someone when they want to learn more, the way you allow them to indicate explicit interest, all of that is your handshake to the person who wants to learn more, who wants to investigate more, who is excited about what you're presenting. This is where you welcome them in, and heat maps can tell you just how well you're doing that. The second measure encompasses what I call the hospitality component of any clinical trial funnel. So we got the welcome up here. Now we're transitioning into hospitality. And why do we say that? Well, the diagnostic measure that we look to see just how hospitable we're being is called response times. And response times are exactly what they sound like. It's the average amount of time that it takes someone on your team to get back to a patient who has indicated interest, who has taken a pre-screener, who has tried to schedule a consent appointment, or tried to schedule, a screening appointment. That's what we call hospitality, and we measure that through response times. The average amount of time that it takes for someone on your team to get back to anyone who's interested or has questions or has follow-ups. At Clara, we shoot for a 20-second response time. 20 seconds, not 20 minutes, 20 seconds. The way we're able to do that is through a lot of optimization through our Clara platform. We can schedule automatic text messages and emails and reminders. So it's pretty powerful tooling that we have at our fingertips that allow us to be immediately hospitable to the patient who is interested in our trials. So there's never a point in which a patient feels like they got dropped off. We've seen in the industry sometimes that it takes 72 hours to get back to a patient. Occasionally, we've seen a week before a patient hears back. And the nature of these patients who have already found you through hearing your message and visiting your site and dropping their lead information, they are highly motivated and they are looking for alternative paths, more treatment options. They are super, super motivated. They will not wait around. So if you are spending more than 24 hours in getting back to a patient, they will drop off forever. So if you can't measure yourself against that 20-second expectation, measure yourself against that 24-hour expectation, because I promise you that it takes a very rare patient to wait 72 hours before hearing back. So response times then help us understand just where things might be going wrong as we're trying to be hospitable and shepherd a patient through taking the pre-screener, passing the pre-screener, and all the way down to enrollment. If you notice that your conversion rate for, let's say, passing to scheduling a consent appointment is very, very low, look to your response times. I bet you that it's going to uncover a lot about what is going on, what challenges your team might be having, and you will then have the opportunity to optimize around that, to introduce more tooling, to introduce more empowerment to your team, such that they can get that response time down, again, 24 hours, down to that 24-hour magic marker. So those are two diagnostic measures. And that is the Clara framework. That's the framework that we use to analyze and understand what is going on in any recruitment funnel. All it takes is for you to look at your funnel as a set of measures. And by setting that at the center of your daily analysis and putting companion measures next to them and giving yourself the opportunity to diagnose what's going on very quickly with two diagnostic measures, the heat maps and the response times, you will be able to better understand what's going on in that recruitment funnel. You'll understand where the drop-off points are, where the pain points are, where inefficient allocation is happening, and how you can fix them very, very quickly. So this framework, 25 metrics, are very easy to track on a day-to-day basis on any spreadsheet, and it gives you extreme power in optimizing your clinical trial recruitment funnel, and it gives you immediate feedback. And I think that by adopting some of these principles, you'll find that your optimizations begin to take hold faster and yield better and better returns. So that's the framework. Thanks for your time. If you think I've missed anything, if you think I got something wrong, if you have a story to share about your recruitment funnel, you can always email me at aaron@clarahealth.com. That's just AARON at clarahealth.com. Happy to chat about anything that you have on your mind as it pertains to recruitment. Thanks again.